the holy grail of advertising is really being able to build a media mix model as well as attribution models to truly understand what's driving influence. Not just what's driving direct response behavior, but what's driving influence. So what's wrong with the attribution models that are around today, and how can they be improved?
So I moderated a panel yesterday at OMA on attribution models, and we had some interesting perspectives. We had Microsoft, we had a digital agency called Four from Chicago, we had Clear Sailing, and then we had Search Ignite, and they were talking about the way that they are running these models, and it was a kind of interesting kind of education, I think, for the audience as to what are these models, and what are we talking about here, and what are the challenges. And as you go through the evidence that they presented, and you see how many different influences occurred on a consumer before the consumer made that final click, let's say, on a search ad and bought the product at the end of the purchase funnel. And they were quoting stats that said that 90% of all of the things that affected a consumer occurred before that final click. And the final click often gets credit for 100% of the sale. So, I think there's a big educational issue here that is beginning to work, and we're making people aware of the realities, but then putting together these models is not trivial.
Absolutely.
And we do think, though, that the databases that we have will be very helpful there, because if you think of what we have with a panel, we do see all of the online variables that are impacting somebody before they make that final purchase. All of the ad impressions, all of the content that they look at, the search queries that they conduct, the search ads, etc. And so it should be possible from that, coupled with some of these attribution models, to build something rather interesting.
What we've seen in building attribution models is that there's actually a huge advantage to being a large marketer. Obviously, law of the large number or getting statistical significance requires a certain level of spend, a certain amount of impressions. Otherwise, you need to use a longer period of time to attempt to collect the data, at which point you get problems with the clarity of your results. So it's almost creating, at least for us, a situation where the tighter models are the $1 million, $500,000 to $1 million or $1 million plus a month spenders, and you can build a fairly, in particular when there's a lot of offline media and marketing dollars as well, right? Because then you have other things to plug in econometrically. But if you're a small advertiser, it's so often seat of the pants. I mean, they're at such a disadvantage in really trying to understand what is working and what is not working.
Well, let me
even in your panel, I mean, you reach a certain point where there's not enough data.
Well, the advantage we have with the panel is that not only do we see everything over time, but we can also at the same time run these kind of controlled real-world experiments. Take all the people who are exposed to one particular type of marketing program, a control group of people that didn't see that program, and then then you're simulating 100% reach, and let's see what happens. And we do a lot of that kind of work. So I think it's possible to kind of tease out the effects, and we've done a lot of work looking at the effectiveness of search, display, and then search plus display in terms of driving consumer behavior and lifting sales both online and offline. We then most recently compared it to television. So I went back to IRI, which was the company that I was CEO of for many years, and they have a television testing system called Behavior Scan, where they can manipulate the television ads that households see. So they can send an ad every day to one set of homes and once a week to another set of homes, and then look through the scanning data whether the two groups bought differently. So I asked them, send me all of the tests that you've ever conducted of television versus no television. I want to look at what the sales impact was. turned out that over the course of a year, television will lift retail sales for CPG brands by about 8%. On average. That's obviously very, on average, 8%. So then I took all of the studies we've done for CPG brands using the comScore panel, where we looked at display effectiveness and lifting retail sales, and we can measure that because we can link, using the name and address of our panelists, to retailers' frequent shopper databases. Lo and behold, we see a 9% lift over the course of 3 months. And that's before you factor in the cost.
Right.
So that was really encouraging, and I think it's again we're really working hard at getting those kinds of experiments communicated to our clients and getting them to run these kind of experiments. One final thing I just want to mention while we're on the subject of the costs of marketing and whether big companies have an advantage or not, because there's a really interesting story from television days, right? And a lot of people don't realize this. I guess maybe you're going to be as old as I am to remember it. Once upon a time, there was only a 60-second commercial on television. I don't know if you remember those days. There was no 30s, there were no 15s, all right? And
I wasn't buying media at the time, but I was watching it.
Right, there you go. So you'll know the situation, all right? Now, you could argue that's not good for the smaller advertisers, right? I mean, they can't afford to compete with the likes of, Procter & Gamble and the Unilever. And so it was with a company in Chicago called Alberto Calvo. And Len Lavin, who's the founder of Alberto Calvo, one day kind of had enough. And he goes to the networks and he says, I'd like to run a 30-second ad. The network said, I'm sorry, but we don't do anything but 60s. So he took him to court and won. So next thing you know, you got 30-second ads running. Well, he didn't stop there. The next day he went back and asked him to run a 15-second commercial. And, we wouldn't have these commercial lengths if not for a small company that realized that the large companies could maybe outspend him. Now, fortunately, I don't think we have that kind of situation here on the internet because it's so affordable. There's so much inventory. I think you just think about it and carefully plan it out, and I think it's kind of level the playing field, maybe, for the small ones versus the large one.
I mean, I guess we'll probably end up disagreeing on that. We just find that the ability to test and iterate at 10 times the speed with regards to all the levers at one's disposal in a media campaign ends up being a killer advantage. Okay. When you think about it, even if you and I raised $500 million today and wanted to go into the online travel industry, Expedia, Travelocity, and even Orbitz have such a head start on us in every possible way with regards to merchandising and marketing and landing pages and offers, and building potentially personas and understanding how those personas respond and showing different cruise ads to somebody from Chicago versus somebody in Miami. We'd have to learn all that from scratch, right? So even if we had a big war chest behind us, we would have to go through many of the same experiments or do a lot of competitive intelligence research in order to get to where the competitive set was. And I don't know that the local independent plumber can potentially afford to go through that same level of experimentation that the franchisor, a Roto-Rooter or whatever, has been able to do.
That's a fair point. I think certainly the larger companies maybe have more resources and people and the skill sets that are needed to do that. I agree. All I was trying to say is that I don't think there's a barrier. There isn't that spending barrier that used to exist in traditional media.
What the small guys are doing, right, is they're being more creative, more nimble, right, than the big guys. So, it's not that the small guys should stay out of the internet, but I'm not sure it's quite the great equalizer that people originally envisioned it would be. You could be operating out of your basement and be an eBay power seller or even set up your own domain.
It has made for a lot of small local city e-commerce, retailers, suddenly given them a national potential customer base. It's done that. And
right.
I think
absolutely.
That certainly is a big change.
Great. So what process do you think marketers and their agencies should go through in determining a media mix modeling. You know, we talked earlier about experimentation, but should they start with last year's media plan, or should they throw that one out the window if they are independently held and have the ability to be completely nimble?
Yeah. So, well, I think that it's not, I will say it's not easy trying to run these models cross-media today. You know, market mix modeling has been around a long time, obviously. And, you know, it started in consumer packaged goods, I think, because the databases were there, and that's now expanded to other industries. And I think they provide a lot of really valuable information. I think the challenge with the internet is that the internet spending component is so small still for a lot of companies compared to the other elements that it kind of gets lost. You know, and probably the impact that you're trying to measure with the internet is smaller than the error level in the in the models to begin with. So that's been a challenge. So I don't think the way to start is, if you're beginning to think about moving dollars online, I don't think the way to do it is with a market mix model. I would say take some money, put it out there, experiment with it, and then move a modest amount of money online, and at some point run the market mix models. I wouldn't advocate running the models to decide, whether you should be spending, 5% or 15%, of your total media money online.
So it's really more then, I guess, start somewhere and then just improve off of that.
Exactly.
Right? So
exactly.
No matter where you start, as long as you're moving in the right direction, you'll end up better than you started.
Right.